Because this night is very, very special I think to all of us as well, especially by the time we're done. I think we'll know how extraordinary this gathering was. But I thought, what can I do for a few words? And I thought I'd tell you a story. I like a story about the power of the story. Would you like to hear a story?
Yeah.
So then I thought, no, I'll tell you 3 stories. Would you like to hear 3 stories? So I usually take your head and go, no. So I tell you what I thought, 3 stories is too much. So I said, okay, well, I'll tell 3 stories at once. 3 stories at once. I'll tell them really quickly, get them done, and I'll tell them the 3 chapters, okay? But they're all true stories. And they have a lot to do with tonight. Okay, so the 3 stories I'm going to tell you a story about a climber, a rock climber. I'm going to tell you a true story about a clothing store in Boston. I'm going to tell you a little true story from my life about me and a napkin. Sounds really great, doesn't it? But let's start with a rock climber. So, in real life, there's this rock climber, and he's in his early 20s, and his passion, his love is nature, and being out in nature and climbing the rocks in nature. He's climbing at a time when the technology to climb a rock is hammers and pins. You know, and then you use that to get up the rock, and then you hammer that thing back out, and then you use it for the next step up. And he loves climbing. He's broke. But one day he spots what he believes is the way to make the pins and the hammers a little bit better, equipment-wise, maybe an opportunity to fund his passion for climbing and nature and the outdoors. So he improves the pin, and he starts selling it out. He makes them in his garage, starts selling it on the back of his piece of shit station wagon, and it makes him just a tiny, tiny bit of money, but it sustains his passion for that. But pretty soon, his pins, climbers love them. They spread, and one day he's climbing the north face of El Capitan in the tremendous Yosemite. He sees the damage that his pins are doing to El Capitan. And it breaks his heart. It's crushing to him that the very thing he loves is being damaged by the very thing he's making. It's a true crisis. Now, let's skip stories. Let's go to a quick story. Let's do the story, true story about a clothing store in Boston. They just opened up this brand new location. What they did at this particular clothing store is they got an old building, they retrofitted the building, and then they opened it up for business. Well, 2 days later, most of the employees working at that store had severe headaches. So they called in an environmental engineer who did research there in the store, and he came back with a report. The reason why the employees are having headaches, he says, is because this building is recirculating the air. And the air is poisonous and toxic. The primary poison that's hurting your employees in here is formaldehyde. He said, well, where's the formaldehyde coming? He said, well, it'll take further investigation to find out. Let's go to a different story. Me and a napkin. So, this is just the smallest thing, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's true. I am celebrating this year 22 years of only taking 1 napkin at the most. Just my little way of being planet friendly. And I have 2 kids, and I've raised them both on the same thing, like just take what you need. Just 1 napkin. Even when they give you 2 or 3, give the other ones back. It helps the earth a little bit, everything we can get. Everything else. So 22 years of 1 napkin. Chapter 2. Chapter 2, the climber. It really bothers him that his pins are destroying nature. So he goes to work on an idea, and he comes up with a completely different system for climbing. One that you don't have to pound into the rocks. As a matter of fact, you just secure it into a crack, turn it, it has a ribbon, you put your rope in there, and then once you pass that point, you just turn it, pull it back out, and the rock is damage-free. So he's got a little catalog for his growing business, which is quite small. And in the catalog, he's got to convince climbers that they ought to use this new technology. So he writes a thing, a little manifesto to go along with the catalog, and I want to read it to you because I really like the words. I think you might too. So to convince people to maybe use his new technology, he says there's a word for it, and the word is clean. Climbing with only nuts and runners for protection is clean climbing. Clean because the rock is left unaltered by the passing climber. Clean because nothing is hammered into the rock and then hammered back out, leaving the rock scarred, and the next climber's experience less natural. Clean because the climber's protection leaves little trace of his ascension. Clean is climbing a rock without changing it. Our clothing store. So the investigation reveals that the source of formaldehyde is the clothing they're selling. And particularly the cotton, which is in 66 of their products. So they follow the investigation a little further. They go, okay, well, cotton, where's cotton? Remember, they'd never known where the cotton was actually going. They knew where it was, but they'd never been there. So this woman and this man and their team from the clothing company took a trip to California to see the beautiful cotton fields in the San Joaquin Valley. But they weren't beautiful cotton fields. The way they describe them is they looked like a lunar landscape of destruction. Selenium pools that stunk like shit. Poisonous chemicals sprayed everywhere. As a matter of fact, the poisonous chemicals weren't just destroying all the land it touched, but it was hurting the people that were raising and picking that cotton, causing health problems. And they stood and they looked at the source of their business. And they turned to each other and said, how can we continue to sell clothing that lays waste to planet Earth? If we can't move to organic cotton, we don't deserve to be in business. But they knew immediately that it would be almost impossible to move to organic cotton. There were not enough growers in the world to supply them with enough organic cotton. If they used organic cotton, they were going to have to raise the price on all their clothing, but the buyer would see no real benefit. The same looking piece of clothing would just be much more expensive. He said, well, we don't want to be in business if we can't do it. We'll give ourselves 2 years to shift our entire clothing line to organic cotton. Me and the napkin. So 22 years to this, right? So I'll tell you where I started this napkin habit in real life. I was at a cafeteria and I was doing business there. And I had a host that was kind of, walking me around and showing me the thing. And I was about 28 years old, and I got my food tray. The cafeteria was almost all vegetarian. And I remember putting my fork on the tray, I remember putting my spoon on the tray, and then I remember grabbing a handful of napkins and putting them on the tray. If you count the napkins, probably would have been about 3 of them, right? Absolutely, totally normal in my life at 28 years old. And this woman who was my host, who had been perfectly hospitable and kind, at this moment suddenly snapped. And she turned to me and she goes, are you sure you need 3 napkins? I felt embarrassed. And she's like, rainforests are dying. And napkins don't just come out of nowhere. They come from trees. Here we like to just take what we need. I know it seems like, what's a couple napkins? Like, what difference can that make for the world? But every action makes a difference for the world. Do you know, that was the actual first moment in my entire life where I ever connected my actions to the world at large. So the climber made the new clean climbing gear, right? Came with a surprise. Not only did that climbing gear protect the climber on their way up, but it perfectly protected nature itself, and it left no trace whatsoever of damage. But the surprise was that his business skyrocketed. And it gave this young man and his new climbing company an aha, which was, so I can do good for the world, and it's good for business. Sometimes the force speaks subtly, sometimes it yells. Excellent. The clothing company. Last chapter of our clothing company with the toxic problem. In 2 years' time, they pulled off the impossible and they converted their entire company all their clothing line to organic cotton. They were the first company on earth to do so. It almost put them out of business. Their profits dropped immensely during that 2-year period. But there's one little device I want to tell you about that I think really matters tonight. We can talk more about it later. But in order to accomplish and survive that dramatic change for planet Earth, they enrolled the consumer by putting labels on every single one of those pieces of clothing that explained that if you would pay more for this garment, it would transform you into basically an eco-hero instead of just a passive consumer. So they brought a lot of people along for the ride. And finally, me and the napkin. The last part I tell you about me and the napkin is that they, with that woman at that company, where I first connected myself with my actions to the world large, that company was remarkable. Really, me and a couple other people were down there. They had an open door policy where you could come in and they would share their best practices with you and the remarkable ways that they were trying to conduct business. And I never forget their mission statement. Their mission statement said, build the best products, cause no unnecessary harm, and use business as an inspiration and a solution to the ecological crisis. Well, the woman that told me about the napkin was the same woman that went to the fields in the San Joaquin Valley with her company to say, we got to change to organic cotton. The company she worked for was founded by the climber who looked for a better way to bring his values into business. Who knows the company? Patagonia. Did you know that 4 years ago, Patagonia, actually Yvon Chouinard, the founder himself, the young climber in our story, at 73 years old, made sure that he was the first person in line on January 3rd, 2012, maybe 14. You get the point. Because California was going to enable companies to legally become for benefit. And Yvon Chouinard was the very first person in line, and Patagonia became the very first California for benefit company. Yeah.